African currencies have taken a battering in the past 18 months or so. Now, the Nigerian Naira and the Angolan Kwanza have been flagged as the continent's worst performing currencies so far in 2023, with a year-to-date depreciation of nearly 40%. The World Bank also flagged the currencies of South Sudan, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Zambia, Ghana, and Rwanda. There are many issues affecting our currencies, including the parallel exchange market rates, which are compounding inflationary problems for some countries in the sub-Saharan Africa region. Kassimu Garba Kurfi, CEO, APT Securities and Funds, joins me now. Kassimu, welcome to Business Edge again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So when we look at the factors around what is affecting our currencies here on the continent, there are many, many things that we can lay our hands on. But I want you to start with giving me your top three. The top three factors you see are responsible for the battering that African currencies have undergone in recent times.
Okay, the margin of the single exchange rate that really devalue our Naira. You remember the official rate was just 400, even as at May. Now we are talking of about 800, so almost double. So that is one of the single act that devalue the Naira. The other issue is that our source of foreign exchange, crude oil is the major source of foreign oil exchange, and now we cannot meet up the OPEC. If you remember, 2-3 years back, we are producing as much as 2 million barrels per day. Today, we are talking of just 1 million to 1.2, and this is a serious matter. Thirdly, is the forward contract that already entered by the CBN. CBN entered forward contract, and this forward contract means that you have taken Naira in advance, you are going to pay dollars. And that forward contract did not work in favor of CBN because a lot of the forward contract entered when Naira was just about 490. And today, look at the dollar. That is why some of the Morgan Sterling devalue our reserve. Say that if we net on the forward contract that we have already committed ourselves, our foreign reserve has gone far down. And this affects our letter of credit by some of the banks.
Mm-hmm. And those are conversations we've had with you and others in recent times. So basically, Nigeria topping this list probably surprises no one. And one of the issues the World Bank raised has been this issue around the parallel exchange rates, which you just talked about. So let me paint a picture. We're still about 2.5 months out from the end of the year. So with the managed float of the Naira, do you still expect the Naira to stay on top of this list into 2024? Or will we start to see the positive, hopefully positive consequences of the Tinubu administration floating the Naira?
Well, if the government takes the right measures, and the right measures is that we need to borrow. We need to borrow to meet up this gap, otherwise the fluctuation is likely going to go up. But hopefully, because we have a bumper harvest and make most of our export product to be cheaper, so we are likely going to have more demand of our agricultural product because of the devaluation of the Naira, and that will feature some of the foreign currency. But remember, even when you export, it may take between 60 to 90 days, which we may not have those days before the end of the year, so the government needs to borrow to meet up the gap, otherwise the fluctuation will go further high.
Mm. So we know that Nigeria and Angola, they're following each other in this unfortunate situation of year-to-date depreciation of their currencies. Angola, in the past year and a half or so, has occasionally on a monthly basis, sometimes overtaken Nigeria when it comes to crude oil production. So they're neck and neck. And in terms of the similarities around the situations happening, Kassimu, let's go through the implications of having depreciating currencies. What are those implications on Nigeria and Angola's fiscal positions? Are they similar? Or we're looking at two very separate and distinct situations happening here?
We are only similar in terms of the crude oil. Angola export crude oil, even though they have some mineral, but their major source is crude oil, just like Nigeria. But we differ in the sense that we have the population and we have the product. If we expand our exportation to agricultural product, that may fetch us some of the dollars that can cool down the high demand of dollar in the country. Remember, we have a lot of Nigerians in diaspora, and last year they remitted not less than 20 billion. And if they can repeat the same for this year, that can also bring. And don't forget that most of our remittance we get it from now to December, in preparation for the Isman and the New Year. And if we can get substantial part of it from the diaspora, that can also reduce the demand gap. Otherwise, the fluctuation will go, and that will confound our inflation. Our inflation is rising and may likely to continue.
So Nigeria, Angola, those currencies are topping the list as the worst currencies, but they're not the only ones going through some very difficult times. So also on the list, we have South Sudan, which lost 33% of value. Burundi's currency lost 27%. The Democratic Republic of the Congo's currency lost 18%, while Kenya's currency lost 16%, Zambia's 12%, Ghana's another 12%, and Rwanda 11%. And that is, of course, year to date. Now, this looks like a trend. We have a number of countries on that list whose currencies have lost more than 10% of their value so far in 2023. So let's look at it in that sort of aspect in terms of the narrative of a trend. Are we seeing this also play out outside of the African continent? Earlier on the headlines, I made reference to the governor of the Central Bank of South Africa, who said that they will not intervene to help the rand to stabilize because the rand is being caught up in what is a global redevelopment, reconfiguration of currencies. Is that enough of a reason for us to say that, okay, let's not worry, this is not just happening here on the continent?
Well, in case of the Nigeria, we know that the single government policy is that what leads us to where we are. But they have no choice than to do it, and that's what differ with the rates. The other one were gradual rising. Ours is just steady. If you remember, this all happened within the last 3 months. And that's what makes us differ. But the other side of ours is that if the government identified the gap and can go extra mile to borrow to meet up those gaps, that will stabilize our Naira. And don't forget we have the capacity. If they can tackle the stealing of the crude oil and be able to meet up the quota, if we can produce 1.8 barrel per day, that's enough to cushion our position. In addition to that, if we can demand more of the Nigerian product, less of the foreign product because of the expensive nature of it, that will also reduce the demand of the foreign exchange. But the worst part of it is that we are demanding the foreign exchange to import refined product. Until we see the Dangote functioning, the Nigerian refinery function, this will worsen our situation. But as Dangote said that we likely start production by November, if we can get that one, the mere production for the month of December is enough to cushion our position.
So the World Bank's Africa's Pulse report flags the issue of parallel exchange market rates as compounding inflationary problems for some countries in the African region. And that's something you've alluded to and you've answered earlier. But I want to talk about this in terms of the inflation pass-through from the parallel market. What can we do to address that inflation pass-through from the parallel market that's putting more pressure on the real economy, putting more pressure on whatever Naira is left in the pockets of Nigerians, whatever Kwanza is left in the pockets of Angolans, whatever rand is even left in the pockets of South Africans? That particular sort of demarcation, that part of the conversation, how do we address it?
Well, for us, we wait to see the policy coming by the new Syrian government. Because if you want to address inflation, you cannot rule out the monetary policy. So we expect to get a monetary policy. But don't forget that we have already have expansionary fiscal policy. Because when you decided to give 35,000 Naira for each federal civil servant, and you decided to give 25,000 for 15 million each month, what does that mean? That means we are going to spend over 1.2 trillion from now, from October to December, just on that palliative. And if we decided to do that plus the civil servant, that will also bring expansionary policy to the monetary policy. So we need to see what rate MPR policy will come by the CBN. Otherwise, the inflation will go and we may be even worse than where we are today.
Mm-hmm. In terms of that, let's look at the impact on the market. I'm very sure investors are trying to hedge against these type of inflationary issues. And what can we do with the market that can bring the investors in? Is there anything that can be done, really?
Well, if you remember that the manufacturers are already complaining that they have a lot of stock in their warehouse, there is no purchasing power. when there is no purchasing power, you cannot even increase the price because the one that you have produced, you cannot. And that can reduce productivity and bring more up unemployment. Hopefully, the government will come with a policy that will see to it to harmonize the fiscal and monetary policy that will address this gap.
Okay, Kassimu, before we wrap up, a final question in terms of the steps that countries must take to address the fall of their currencies. We know that, of course, all of these are not things that are under the control of administrations or governments, but whatever is under our control, what do we need to do?
Well, the government must expand the source of our foreign exchange. We shouldn't rely on crude oil. We have a lot of minerals, and the government should find the way to stop this insecurity, to promote this mining, so that we expand other products that we can expand both from the mineral and the agricultural product to source more foreign exchange. And also, the federal government should set a policy that will encourage Nigerian in diaspora that can subscribe so that we get more remittance than what we are getting. If we get all this policy right, I think that will reduce the tension and that will stabilize the exchange rate and that will reduce also the inflation.
All right, so we'll see if we can get some good movement in the coming months before we wrap up 2023. And hopefully the Naira and the Angolan Kwanza and even all of the African currencies that have been flagged do find some relief in the coming weeks. Kassimu, Garba, Kurfi, CEO, APT Securities and Funds, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
As always.